Well, good evening and welcome back to the Original Promise of America lecture series. My name is Jeffrey Mainville. I'm the executive director here at the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society. As the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence approaches us in 2026, the America 250 project is ramping up at the local, state, and national levels, and events are being planned all across America. Here in West Hartford, the birthplace of Noah Webster, we are proud to be contributing to these conversations. Tonight is part 2 of the 3 scheduled lectures in this series. Our final lecture will be November 21st, and they are all being presented free of charge. As we continue to populate our museum calendar with new lectures and programs, I'd like to take just a moment to talk about a few of those. The Masters series begins on October 10th, and the first program is entitled Constructing Connecticut, Cultural Transmission and Timber Framing, 1680 to 1730. So if you love old houses and preserving the past, you should consider purchasing a ticket to this evening, later this evening perhaps, on the museum's website. It's very easy to do. Calling all fiber artists and fabric aficionados, don't miss textile production in early America on November 7th. You'll also notice in the portraits around the room, these are Holocaust survivors that settled in Hartford and West Hartford and the surrounding region. And this exhibit is on loan to us from the Voices of Hope organization in Farmington. To accompany this exhibit, we are presenting a lecture on 2 Holocaust memorials created by Hartford-born sculptor Albert Weinberg. This presentation is on Wednesday, October 9th at 6 p.m. and tickets are on sale. It's very reasonably priced at $5. And finally, don't miss the opportunity to tour one of the oldest private houses in Connecticut, the John Deming House in Old Wethersfield, which was originally constructed in 1666. Tickets are $20, and the tour is on Saturday, October 5th. You can pretty much show up anytime between 10 and 1:30, but again, you can purchase tickets on our website, and it benefits us here at the Noah Webster House. And there's lots of other fun stuff to do in Old Wethersfield that day. There's a scarecrow parade. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome back tonight's presenter. Gene Leach is a longtime resident of West Hartford, and he was professor of United States History and American Studies at Trinity College in Hartford for nearly 40 years until his retirement in 2012. Gene came to Trinity College in 1975 with degrees from Harvard, Michigan, and Yale universities. And various points in his long tenure, he directed the American Studies program, he chaired the history department, and he directed the graduate programs in both fields. His scholarship has centered on American social thought and this country's working class. Professor Leach has written, lectured, and served on governing boards of several organizations devoted to Connecticut history and culture, including this one, the West Hartford Historical Society. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back, a big round of applause, for our good friend, Professor Gene Leach.
Okay.
Here's your clicker, forward, backwards.
Right. Got it.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I particularly want to thank the man who just introduced me, Jeff Mainville. I have to get to know him. He is primarily responsible for the series, and I thank him too for setting up what he calls this command module that I'll be speaking from, and I hope I can manage it properly. I also want to thank Sheila Daly, who is the curator here, who was essential to the PowerPoint, very modest PowerPoint set of illustrations, which she has actually done for me several times in the course of my history with the Noah Webster House. And the whole staff here is a lovely bunch of people. Very, very dedicated, very cooperative, very welcoming. This is the second of a series of 3 lectures, as Jeff mentioned. The Original Promise of America, and by the way, occasionally I am going to refer to this text, partly because those of you who attended last time know I'm big on quotation, and this could bespeak a certain personal insecurity on my part, that I'm afraid to use my own voice and instead ventriloquize through other voices. I'm not sure what it really means, but I've always done this in 50 years of teaching. And actually, I love the actual voices as opposed to voices of historians interpreting the voices. And that goes for me too. So I'm gonna follow that practice here, as I always have. And anyway, don't be too spooked by the fact that I have a sheaf of papers here. There isn't all that much text on them. But to recap the series to this point, the three lectures are keyed to the Declaration of Independence. The most majestic sentence in the Declaration, I think the most majestic sentence in all of American history, goes like this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." What would an independent American nation promise its citizens according to the Founding Fathers? Above all, equality, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I lectured first last time on this third element of the Declaration triad, that is the pursuit of happiness, because I believe the great majority of revolutionaries, that is the common people of America as opposed to the small cluster of Founding Fathers, the great majority of revolutionaries differed with the Founding Fathers. For them, you might call them the founding followers, the first right that they fought for, the main thing they thought America promised them, was happiness. From the very first European migrations, colonists thought of America as, and this is a quote from William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation, promised them a place where they might have liberty and live comfortably. Notice the connection: live comfortably, happiness, liberty, liberty and live comfortably. Beautiful quotation. Americans put these two together. They wanted liberty very largely for the purpose of pursuing happiness. And they resented the English for starting to interfere with their right to pursue happiness. Benjamin Franklin, who is going to be the star of this lecture, the protagonist, here he is, and I see the PowerPoint is already loaded for me. This is possibly his most celebrated portrait. There were dozens and dozens made of him. By some measures, he was one of the best known people in the world, certainly in the European world, in his time, which is particularly remarkable given the humble origins that he started from, and the fact that he was stranded 3,000 miles from the European continent, off in the wilds of America. Quite extraordinary career. In any case, this is Franklin. Franklin, on top of everything else he did, always had the sharpest of insights into the new country he came to virtually personify. He once told a Scottish friend that the North American continent held so much natural wealth that it was futile for Great Britain to try to keep the Americans from seizing it. And this is Franklin. "America, an immense territory, favored by nature with all advantages of climate, soil, great navigable rivers and lakes, and so on, must become a great independent country, populous and mighty, and will, in less time than is generally conceived, be able to shake off any shackles that may be imposed on her." This is, I think, from the 1760s. In the meantime, any efforts and this is my voice, in the meantime, any efforts to beat down the Americans would only infuriate them and hasten their rebellion. This is again Franklin. "For the seeds of liberty are universally sown here, and nothing can eradicate them." I would propose that the passion for liberty that patriots began to so vehemently express in the 1760s was twinned with their passion to acquire enough property to live comfortably, in Bradford's phrase, to be happy. And their successors have identified liberty with material prosperity and material prosperity with happiness ever since, down to the present day. Talk about basic American characteristics. On liberty, in this period, there is more than anyone could possibly say. I'll begin with Patrick Henry, and in fact, I will show you his most famous moment, speaking before the Virginia Assembly. This is an event in 75, shortly after news of Lexington and Concord. Patrick Liberty, Patrick Liberty, he might as well have been named Patrick Liberty. I have just rechristened him in that way. This is Henry. Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Some other images of liberty in this period. It is all over the place, but this is the Sons of Liberty burning the Stamp Act. This is 1765, toward the initiation of the contention between the mother country and the colonies. So this, of course, goes back a long way. This appeared at the beginning of the lecture, a wonderful front piece for me. This is a Liberty tree, and I'm not sure where this was. I was not able to track that down. The image is from 1865, but there were many such trees designated as Liberty trees. They were places where Sons of Liberty and other patriots could gather. This is one of the weirdest images. I couldn't find as many as I thought I might, but this is Lady Liberty. Very often Liberty is depicted as a woman in classical dress, and very often she carries a Liberty cap, usually sported on a pole. And you see that here. She is freeing a bird. This comes from a blog on women in American history. I could have given you lots of beautiful Roman or fake Roman sculptures or other kinds of depictions, but I thought this is fascinating. Interesting too that there are churches in the background. I mean, this is a kind of a comprehensive invocation of values in America in this period. To move on, if much of the revolutionaries' thinking about liberty seems familiar to us, and certainly this infatuation with liberty that I've mentioned so far is familiar to us, much else seems utterly alien. For the patriots, liberty was far from being in their minds the uncomplicated and universal right it has become in ours. To start with, the white male liberty lovers who carried out the revolution were intent on strictly curtailing and controlling the liberty of virtually all other Americans. The liberty they were talking about was their liberty. They denied political liberty, especially voting rights, to the women who made up half the white colonial population. They conceded women only shreds of economic and social liberty. For that matter, propertied white males called for curtailing the political liberty of poor white males by attaching property qualifications to voting rights, and propertied white men denied liberty altogether to the black slaves who made up fully 20% of the colonial population in the mid-18th century, 20%, an even larger percent in many cities. And I will point out here, this anticipates some themes that come later in the lecture, that the connection between property and liberty is clearly writ in the fact that women are denied property rights. The first thing that women go after to free themselves in the 19th century is the right to control their own property. Already that nexus, property and liberty, is very strong. The last awful fact that I mentioned, the fact of slavery, seems the greatest anomaly in the value system of the revolutionaries. White American men, by their perception and the perception of many other contemporaries of theirs, were the freest people in the world in the 18th century. These free people made black Americans some of the most oppressed people in the world. This seeming anomaly to us was much less so to white males of the 18th century, owing to their belief in the utter sanctity of private property. They saw liberty as virtually inseparable from their right to get and possess property. In the South, in fact, most white men held that their liberty depended absolutely on their right to property, including their right to hold property in people. The plantation slavery of South Carolina and Virginia made those colonies by far the richest British colonies on the American mainland. We will revisit this coexistence, this seemingly bizarre coexistence, certainly ugly coexistence, of white liberty and black enslavement in the next lecture of this series, titled The Proposition That All Men Are Created Equal. Notice the proposition that all men are created equal. I'm not going to argue that they really asserted it. Now for the game plan of this lecture. I'm going to start by arguing that the liberty that white male revolutionaries thought America promised them dramatically changed during the period of the revolution, before it, during it, and after it. Prior to the revolution, Americans defined liberty primarily as private liberty. They wanted liberty that allowed them to attend to the interests of themselves, their families, and their immediate communities. With respect to government imposed on them by authorities beyond their local communities, the freedom they wanted was a negative freedom, freedom from all such government. Once the revolution broke out, what Americans meant by liberty rapidly evolved from a private into a public thing. They redefined liberty as the treasure that fitted them for citizenship of a republic. This was a positive freedom, freedom to participate in the government beyond their communities, which that government now being their government, a republic. Dramatic transition from the negative freedom of wanting nothing to do with government to the insistence on the right to participate in government. To begin before the revolution with private liberty, I'm going to start with sort of an abstract run-through of what liberty meant to the colonists, and then proceed on to the personal illustration of Franklin. Understanding how the revolutionary generation defined liberty has to begin with realizing that they utterly rejected individualism. That is a word that was originally coined to cast scorn on the excesses of liberty in the French Revolution. For the great majority of American revolutionaries, liberty meant a proper balancing of individuals' rights with their duties to society. Many historians have commented on the communalism of early white America. Colonials, like many other contemporaries, assumed individuals were creatures of their families and communities, not the other way around. Insofar as white colonials thought about their self-interest, they presumed that it coincided with the interests of the primary groups that protected them and gave their lives meaning. Only madmen acted against the collective interests of their groups. Only wicked men indulged their purely selfish ends at the expense of their groups. Great historians, I think particularly of Gary Nash and Joyce Appleby, observed that colonial Americans regarded corporate bodies, churches, towns, not individuals, as the basic units of human society, certainly of their societies. Another historian, Barry Shane, I think over-argues the case, but nonetheless assembles a great deal of evidence for the proposition that, as he says, most Revolutionary era Americans believed it was the necessary role of institutions to limit and reform the sinful individual. Institutions more important than individuals. Natural liberty, the condition of being free to do whatever you wanted without restraint, was disdained. Here is a 1734 English pamphlet, and these same views would be very current in America too. Here is the statement: all peace, all order in society is maintained by some restrictions on natural liberty. The anarchy of natural liberty, wholly unrestrained, would be as great an evil as the slavery of a liberty, of no liberty at all allowed. In fact, white people in early America so much distrusted natural liberty, that is, unbounded liberty, that they didn't trust even the word to go around on its own. Clergymen, political officials, writers, orators almost always gave the word liberty an adjectival chaperone, a minder. They spoke of rational liberty, temperate liberty, Christian liberty. Pretty clear indication that they prized only liberty that was properly bounded, limited by other things they valued. All the bounds that colonials attached to liberty had at least this in common. They were intended to produce a liberty that allowed individuals to do as they pleased, so long as their liberty did not infringe on the liberty of other people. This is a quotation from a very popular radical Whig publication in England by the writers Trenchard and Gordon, Cato's Letters. The date is 1720. Trenchard and Gordon defined liberty as the power which every man has over his own actions and his right to enjoy the fruit of his labor, art, and industry, as far as he hurts not the society or any member of it by hindering him from enjoying what he himself enjoys. Typically, the American colonists, like their English cousins, expected government to maintain this balance. On the one hand, safeguarding everyone's liberty to enjoy the fruit of his labor. On the other hand, properly restricting everyone's liberty so as to safeguard the liberty of others. Straight out of Trenchard and Gordon and straight out of English and American culture at that time. It was taken virtually for granted that true liberty can't really be said to exist without government. As a matter of fact, John Locke, it's controversial, but he's often interpreted as the most influential political philosopher in the English-speaking world at this time. The famous John Locke said this: "The end of law," in italics, "the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom." This is John Locke. But precisely because the colonists believed proper government was essential to liberty, they believed too that improper government, tyrannical government, is the worst form, was the greatest subverter of liberty. 2/3 of the Declaration of Independence enumerated, and I quote, "the repeated injuries and usurpations by which King George and his ministers sought to erect an absolute tyranny over these states," meaning these colonies at that point. Thus, colonial white Americans saw liberty as a supremely complex and fragile value. But something else has to be said about colonial Americans' conception of liberty. It was never static. Not long after the first voyages to America, migrants began to rethink the logic of binding liberty on this continent where natural resources were not scarce and where ordinary people had extraordinary opportunities to improve their condition. These American advantages might justify relaxing the bounds on liberty that were needed to secure order and secure property in less favored environments. After all that fertile land. American conditions invited Americans to imagine less bounded ways of living on this continent, and especially less governed ways of living on this continent. In bountiful America, there might be less need for coercive government to protect property and keep public order. Here, it might be possible to rely on people's voluntary respect for one another to do these very necessary things. On to the next section, Republican liberty. These imaginings about the possibility of a less bounded liberty in America, these imaginings suddenly became possibilities with the success, real possibilities, with the success of the revolution. The triumphant revolutionaries found themselves empowered as never before to defend their private interests. Our own Noah Webster trumpeted Americans' pride in their status as substantial independent freeholders masters of their own persons and lords of their own soil. But now these independent freeholders were also citizens of a republic, empowered and obligated to care for the public interest as well as their private persons and goods. One might look at revolutionary Americans' growing conviction, one should look at Americans' growing conviction that their revolution had to be more than a political rebellion against the crown. It had to initiate the creation of a whole new Republican society. And I developed this theme at some length in the preceding lecture. Let me offer what I think was the revolutionaries' best case for an American republic. It's very much my construction, but it gives them credit for a great deal of self-knowledge, perhaps more than most people typically have. Nonetheless, here it goes. People are by nature selfish and sinful, and the great majority of them are inevitably preoccupied with their private interests, the welfare of themselves, their families, their local communities. But there does exist another, kinder and gentler dimension to human nature. Along with their selfishness, people also have in them some natural benevolence and fellow feeling. Moreover, here in bountiful America, Americans can improve themselves. Here they enjoy unparalleled opportunities to acquire property, education, and experience that permits them to see beyond their private interests, and thus to develop their benevolent, virtuous side, that also natural side of their nature. In America, the many can become as qualified to govern as the privileged few are in other societies. Literally a revolutionary perception. Notice that by this theory, a republic requires a wide distribution of property. Citizens of a republic must be able to think for themselves. They cannot be economically dependent on others. They can't owe their livelihood to others. So in a republic, liberty and property depend on each other. Liberty enables a person to acquire property of his own. Property enables him to defend his liberty. The two are intertwined. And something else has to be widely distributed in a republic, at least many Americans so believe, and that is virtue. If a man's property supports his liberty, his virtue justifies his liberty. The one is strictly practical, the other is moral and spiritual, as it were. From the perspective of property white men, all of the speculation about Republican liberty could easily get out of hand. The notion that a republic required a wide distribution of property could puff up into the heresy that a republic actually required a rough equality of property. And indeed, there were voices in America in the 1770s and 1780s that spoke for a much more equal distribution of wealth, property of all kinds than naturally occurred. And this sort of hazard wasn't just theoretical. Already, Americans who weren't propertied white males were beginning to assert their right to liberty. In other words, this liberty business had explosive potential. It spread, it expanded. This is John Adams in reply to his wife Abigail's famous injunction to him, really a suggestion to him, that as he and his colleagues pursued American independence, that they remember the ladies. You've probably heard this phrase before. What is never quoted is Adams' reply to Abigail Adams. And it is I presume he is chastising his wife for overselling the prospects of liberty for women. It is a dangerous proposition. Anyway, this is Adams. We have been told that our struggle has already loosened the bands of government everywhere. In other words, you're telling me, Abigail, to loosen bonds on women. Meanwhile, everyone is asking for loosened bonds. We have been told that our struggle has loosened the bonds of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that Indians slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew more insolent to their masters. Liberty was spreading, and this was, from the point of view of the whites who thought of liberty as theirs, a dangerous tendency. Now to pass to the most celebrated American of his time, one of the most gifted Americans of any time, Benjamin Franklin. I would propose that any inquiry into how revolutionary Americans thought about the promise of their new country really has to pay a visit to Franklin. He had no equal in shaping those thoughts. As author of pamphlets and essays, as publisher of newspapers, and Poor Richard's Almanac, a bestseller in the 18th century, as postmaster of British America, as promoter of libraries and schools, as patron of printers all over the world, circulated more ideas about what America was and what it might become than any thousand the new republic. I think he deserves to be considered the preeminent founding father of the new republic's culture. Franklin spoke directly to the common people, especially the middling sort of people, neither rich nor poor, who were his people. It was their numerousness and energy that fed his confidence in America's great future. Americans were, as a friend of his once said, a rising people whose dynamism Franklin felt he personified. Yet he was not blind to Americans' faults. He felt he personified the faults too, and so he knew the country needed sensible ideals and standards to guide its growth. From early on in his career, he set about meeting this need. He most influenced Americans' sense of how to realize the promise of their country in his solitary book, his autobiography. First, I'm going to talk about the colonial Franklin, who I would like to suggest presented himself as a model of private liberty bounded by private virtue. Franklin started writing the autobiography while serving as an agent of the Pennsylvania Assembly in its relations with its proprietors, its owners, the William Penn family. This was 1771. While visiting an Anglican bishop in the countryside, he dashed off an account of his life up to the age of 25 in just 2 weeks. But his multiplying diplomatic duties, he later became agent of Georgia, Massachusetts, and other colonies as well, and then the Revolution kept Franklin from resuming his story until 1784, 13 years later. He was still working on the autobiography when his death in 1790 left it unfinished. Franklin put the opening of his autobiography in the form of a letter to his son William, who was the royal governor of New Jersey. And by the way, Franklin's own influence was primarily responsible for that appointment of his son as governor of New Jersey. Franklin was himself a potent official of the British Empire, in a sense. His purpose, he told William in this writing, was to describe his rise from the poverty and obscurity in which I was born to a state of affluence and some degree of reputation in the world, as well as a considerable share of felicity. Notice, he talks prominently about the pursuit of happiness. Franklin said his posterity might like to know how he accomplished all this and possibly adopt his methods to gain affluence, reputation, and felicity for themselves. But even the first part of the autobiography wasn't really the private family memoir Franklin claimed it was. Disguising his book in this way allowed him to use an intimate style to beguile his intended public audience. And he was already a master of that style, having used it in Poor Richard's Almanac. For years, Franklin had been dispensing folk wisdom sweetened with wit through his fictional character, Poor Richard Saunders, featured in the almanacs. It's estimated that about 10,000 were sold annually, tremendous number. Franklin was attempting to do the very same thing in his autobiography through the semi-fictionalized character he made out of himself. He makes Benjamin Franklin the protagonist. but really a semi-fictionalized protagonist. In 1771, Franklin's American readers had liberty on their minds. Think back to the images I showed at the beginning. Remember that the Stamp Act Sons of Liberty riot is 1765. This is 6 years before Franklin begins the autobiography. Few Americans objected to being subjects of George III, but a great many of them resented being taxed by a British government in which they had no representation. Increasingly, they suspected British plots to tyrannize over them. Yet Franklin says little about liberty in the first part of his autobiography. In a sense, he couldn't. As an official agent of several colonies, he couldn't risk riling British officials to whom colonial talk about liberty was beginning to sound rebellious. Moreover, Franklin himself was not yet a rebel. He remained a loyal Briton, committed to helping the colonies settle their differences with the mother country. Certainly not an activist, a diplomat. Franklin's silence on liberty becomes more understandable, however, when one notices how much he has to say about virtue. The dominant theme of the whole autobiography is Franklin's conviction that Americans have to justify their liberty by demonstrating how properly they use it. Franklin let other people hold forth on men's right to liberty, people like Patrick Henry. In the first part of his autobiography, Franklin focused on showing his fellow colonists how to deserve and earn their liberty by cultivating virtue. In Franklin's time, it was conventional to think that liberty and order were perpetually in tension, and that a primary responsibility of government was to limit men's liberty to keep order. Franklin thought otherwise. He came to believe that it was possible to reconcile liberty and order not solely by policing liberty, but also, in fact, chiefly by taming liberty, by civilizing liberty, by enlightening liberty, by educating it, by suffusing liberty with virtue. His idea was to have liberty preside over the marriage of liberty with order. In the first part of his autobiography, recounting his life up to age 25, Franklin pictured a colonial landscape strewn with traps and temptations for men like himself. His first employer in Boston proved to be a rascal. Sailing from Boston to Philadelphia to flee from quarrel with another employer, his older brother, the teenage Franklin briefly fell in with a couple of strumpets, as he said, who had stolen a silver spoon from the boat's captain. In other words, bad company. He's only a teenager. Once in Philadelphia, a friend acquired a habit of sodding with brandy and then took to sponging on Franklin until Ben threw him into the Delaware River. Later, the bad habits of another friend rubbed off on Franklin and kept him poor, he testified. And the autobiographer admitted that his younger self had been no saint. The old Franklin painted the young Franklin as a headstrong renegade against all authority, that of his family, the Puritan church, the town government. But the autobiographer carefully cataloged all of his abuses of liberty. He called them errata, errors, and preached against them. His driving purpose was to teach virtue. Men might be born scoundrels, but as they matured, they could learn, they could correct their characters, they could learn to be virtuous. He was brought up in Puritan Boston, very much under the authority of ministers like Cotton Mather, but he testified to evading public worship, particularly once he was out from under the immediate thumb of his father, who was a devout Puritan. Most of the books they had were works of Puritan divinity. So Franklin went another way from very early. Franklin, in fact, came near to being obsessed with the subject of virtue. He tells us that as early as 1728, when he was just 22, he conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. Imagine a 22-year-old striving for moral perfection. This is Franklin from the autobiography. I wish to live without committing any fault at any time. I would conquer all that either natural inclination, custom, or company might lead me into. As I knew, or thought I knew, what was right and wrong, I did not see why I might not always do the one and avoid the other. This is, I'm going to actually, let me see whether I think maybe I will skip over this one and possibly return to it later. But in any case, back to Franklin. Years later, Franklin told a correspondent that he planned to write up the scheme of his in a little work for the benefit of youth to be called The Art of Virtue. He never got around to writing this book, but it remained so much on his mind that when he resumed work on his autobiography in 1784, he described in detail his proposed method for mastering 13 virtues, from temperance and silence to chastity and humility. This is, by the way, the young Franklin. I did miss this one. 1746. This is 2 years before he retired. He was so successful as a printer and publisher, and as a public moralist, the Poor Richard's Almanac, that he retired at the age of 1748, just 2 years after this. He is all of 42 years old. This is roughly from this period. Obviously a very well set up, respectable citizen. This is the scheme for moral perfection. In a little book of pages ruled with 7 columns, one for each day of the week, Franklin marked by a little black spot every fault I found upon examination to have committed respecting that virtue upon that day. So that in the left-hand column there is a temperance, silence, order, and so on through the list of virtues and the days of the week. Franklin's plan was to give a week's strict attention, this is his words, a week's strict attention to each of the virtues successively. He would get through a full week, if he could get through a full week without recording any black spots, indicating lapses from chastity, for instance, he could dedicate the next week to keeping spots out of his humility roll. Franklin figured that he could arrive at moral perfection after putting himself through 4 13-week courses of spotless behavior. That happy day never arrived. He never achieved moral perfection. He said, "I was surprised to find myself so much fuller of faults than I had imagined." He had to exchange his original paper book for one with erasable pages made of thin-cut ivory, which tells you something. But he never regretted his experiment. Simply the, as he called it, endeavor to improve his character made him a better and a happier man. He always acknowledges happiness as one of his key objectives. It made him a better and happier man than I otherwise would have been. As Franklin told his story, his public appearance at business marked the crucial turning point in his rise to real morality, practical morality, but also material success. Setting up his own printing shop freed him from dependence on unreliable others and gave him both means and incentive to mend his ways. He was learning how to use liberty. Franklin credited 2 particular virtues to his success in business, and they also belong to this chart, by the way. Let's see, IND is industry, FRU is frugality. Those are the key 2. To industry and frugality, Franklin said, he owed the acquisition of his fortune. Notice that industry and frugality make up the basic formula for capitalist success. Work hard, produce a lot, spend little, save the rest, and then invest the savings. Invest the savings. This is capitalism 101. This is a particularly handy formula for a poor man who had no money, he had no capital. He could make capital out of his character. And that's exactly what Franklin tried to do, and successfully did. To secure his credit and character as a tradesman, in his words, Franklin recounts, "I took care not only to be in reality industrious and frugal, but to avoid all appearances to the contrary. I dressed plainly. I was seen at no places of idle diversion. I never went out a fishing or a shooting. And I sometimes brought home the paper I purchased at the stores through the streets on a wheelbarrow, kind of flaunting his unpretentious nature. Seeing all of these signs of an industrious, thriving young man, in Franklin's words, merchants flocked to order printing jobs from him. And again, I quote, he said, "I went on swimmingly." The autobiographer also goes out of his way to acknowledge his younger self's dependence on older and wiser people. Franklin would later become the ultimate model of the American self-made man, but that was only much later. In the autobiography, when he's sailing from Boston to Philadelphia, he is saved from falling a prey to the strumpets by a grave, sensible Quaker woman. Once he lands in Philadelphia, it takes battalions of advisors and patrons to get him established in the printing business. Also useful for building both his business and his character is the Junto, a club of improvement-minded young tradesmen like himself, which he primarily formed. The older Franklin, so in other words, he is very much dependent on other people, very much aware that it takes a village to make a capitalist, as it were. That's actually not his phrase. The older Franklin pictured the America of his youth as a country where knaves and thieves abounded, and young men like him could run wild or often run away. But he also pictured the America of his youth as a society that offered plentiful opportunities for people to master themselves, to learn how to make good use of their liberty and thrive. Now we turn to the Republican Franklin. And I would propose that if he offered the private Franklin as a model of private virtue, he offers the Republican Franklin as a model of Republican virtue suffused with public virtue, private virtue versus public virtue. After the Constitutional Convention adjourned in September 1787, a friend of Franklin's named Elizabeth Willing famously asked him, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And Franklin's even more famous reply was, "A republic, if you can keep it." A rather pregnant phrase for us in 2024. A republic, if you can keep it. American leaders had a variety of reasons for doubting that their countrymen could keep their republic. Perhaps the biggest one was the sense that most people were too wrapped up in their private affairs to meet the public needs of Republican citizenship. Ordinary people might know something about governing a town or a county, but they knew nothing about applying an experimental new form of government to an immense country like the United States. And whatever their private virtues, ordinary citizens almost certainly lacked the heroic virtues that could lead them, when the need arose, to sacrifice their private interests to the good of the public. The apotheosis of this great value is Washington, celebratedly the American Cincinnatus, the Roman hero who abandoned the plow, led armies to victory, and then went back to the plow. So does George Washington. Whatever their private virtues, ordinary citizens almost certainly lacked that heroic virtue that would lead them, when the need arose, to sacrifice for the good of the public. Only men of substantial wealth, education, and worldly experience could afford to do that. Consequently, many leaders held that Americans could keep their republic only if it were not too democratic, only if they accepted the superior authority of superior men, only, that is, if their republic retained some of the top-down characteristics of monarchy. Franklin rejected this theory. His own broad experience of different classes and cultures taught him that human nature was profoundly mixed, and he had more experience of the world than any other American, including 23 years of residence in Europe, knowledge of all the colonies through the printers and merchants spread through the colonies. That experience taught him that the great majority of people of all ranks combined privatist selfishness with benevolence and fellow feeling. Very few people had any aptitude for self-sacrifice, but a sustainable republic didn't need heroic citizens. It needed a mass of dutiful citizens, and most people had in them enough natural respect for other people to learn to be dutiful citizens. With all their geographic and economic advantages, Americans would have optimal opportunities for this kind of learning. Moreover, they would have men like Franklin to teach them. You can tell I'm introducing another and final section of this talk. Back to his life after the Revolution. Actually, Franklin didn't give up on England, didn't give up on the project of reconciliation between England and the colonies until the very last moment, until 1775. When he finally left England in that year, he spent the next 9 years on the other side of the Channel, where he brilliantly engineered the crucial French alliance with revolutionary America. This may have been the greatest single service to American victory given by any individual. Franklin is not only a great scientist, something about which I've said nothing. He's not only all the other things he is a key engineer of American victory by virtue of his ability to recruit the French into alliance with the still quite weak and scattered 13 colonies. By the time Franklin returned to Philadelphia and resumed work on his autobiography, by the way, he returned after helping negotiate the Treaty of Paris that ended the war. He is all over the American record. By the time he returned to Philadelphia and resumed work on his autobiography, the revolution had ended and America was an independent republic. Suddenly there existed a self-conscious American public that needed instruction in how to be Republicans. There had never before been a public, certainly not a national public. Franklin's friends told him he was the man for that job, educating Americans on how to be Republicans. One of them, Benjamin Vaughan, said, and this appears in the autobiography itself, all that appears that has happened to you is connected with the manners and situation of a rising people. Franklin cited appeals like Vaughan's to disclaim any vanity on his part, but in reality he was avid to do what his friends urged him to do. His life story had merged with the birth story of the United States. Thus, in the last 3 parts of the autobiography, he dropped his tale of making himself and took up instead the project of making a republic. The last parts were, he announced, intended for the public, in distinct contrast to the way he began the autobiography, claiming that they were a private memoir for his family only. Fittingly, Franklin opens part 2 with an account of his first project of a public nature, the funding of a subscription library in Philadelphia. He recruited 50 ambitious young tradesmen like himself to chip in 40 shillings apiece to buy a collection of books they could lend out among themselves. The experiment thrived. The original 50 grew to 100 subscribers, and soon Franklin conceived the notion of offering the benefit of this resource to the whole city of Philadelphia. According to Franklin, his Philadelphia enterprise became the inspiration and model for subscription libraries all over the colonies. The Republican Franklin drew this moral of the story, and I really, even if I didn't love quotations, I would love this one. These libraries have improved the general conversation of the Americans, made the common tradesmen and farmers as intelligent as most gentlemen from other countries, and perhaps contributed in some degree to the stand so generally made throughout the colonies in defense of their privileges. Notice the importance of that statement. Here in America, ordinary folks are as intelligent and as well-read, and in fact, Americans are the most literate population on earth in this period, much more literate than the English average. The common people in America are as intelligent and as literate, and they're getting close to being as wealthy as the gentry in England. The gentry rule England, why don't the common people rule America? A brilliant argument for a Republican government, a rationale for a Republican government. Franklin goes on in part 2 to tell us that he was drawn into every part of our civil government and volunteered to join almost every other part. He said, the public laid hold of me with their purposes, although it seems equally true that he laid hold of the public with his purposes. He was elected to the City Common Council, to the Pennsylvania Assembly. On his own, he founded a neighborhood watch, in other words, a police force, and fire companies, an academy, and a hospital. He promoted schemes to improve street cleaning and lighting. He helped negotiate treaties with Indians on the western frontier. Of his various promotions to leadership roles, Franklin confessed that he was flattered considering my low beginning. Always, however, he claimed his main motive was to enlarge my power of doing good, virtue, and his compensation was the public's good opinion of me, and therefore more promotions. Franklin's preoccupation with teachable methods of virtue showed itself again in the third section of his autobiography, where he laid out a plan for raising a united party for virtue by forming the virtuous and good men of all nations into a regular body, another totally quixotic scheme. If you can imagine, in the 18th century, an international party of virtue. He complained that the world's powerful men had always put forth their private interests. They'd always put first their private interests. Few in public affairs, he said, act from a view of the good of their country. Fewer still act with a view to the good of mankind. The party of virtue would serve as a counterweight to this dismal pattern. He proposed that to qualify for membership, a man would have to swear his allegiance to virtue and also prove his sincerity by putting himself through the 13 weeks examination that he had outlined. Perhaps, obviously, this never happened. The party of virtue would, however, in theory, be essentially an anti-party. Really no party at all, but a party against the idea of parties. Franklin disliked all tribal organizations devoted exclusively to forwarding their members' interests. Thus, in politics, he disliked standard parties, and in religion, he disliked sects. That's S-E-C-T-S. The only sect he admired was a sort of anti-sectarian sect. Wait a minute, I am really prone to skip over illustrations, and before I come to the conclusion, let me offer these at least. This is the final entry in the virtues category, humility. Do you think there's a certain amount of self-satire here? His idea of humility is imitate Jesus and Socrates. This is Franklin during his latter years in England. Notice the elegance of the costume. He is a prominent, he's already won fame as essentially the first serious investigator of electricity, one of the forces of nature. And he has been an agent of the colonies for years. This is Franklin. I showed this picture last time. This is John Trumbull's Declaration of Independence, painted in 1818, but obviously it belongs to 1776. This is the Committee of Five presenting the Declaration to George Washington. Franklin is the tall, red-haired Jefferson is second from the right, and Franklin, of course, is on the right. This is Franklin, by the way, in a fur cap from his French phase. Contrast this with the elegant Franklin from his English phase. To resume the story of Franklin's activism recounted in part 3 of his autobiography, the party of virtue would be actually an anti-party. He disliked all tribal organizations. He disliked parties in politics, and he disliked sects, denominations in religion. The only sect he admired was a sort of anti-sectarian sect, the Dunkers, who were German pietists who settled on the Pennsylvania frontier in the 1730s. Famously, Pennsylvania is attractive and duly attracts tens of thousands of Germans in the 18th century, the Pennsylvania Dutch. When a Dunker leader lamented, and by the way, the term Dunker refers to their rather aggressive practices of christening in full immersion in water. When a Dunker leader lamented that they were plagued by false tales about their faith, Franklin suggested that they counter the lies by publishing their beliefs for everyone to see. He is a publisher. He believes in spreading the truth. The leader replies that they had chosen not to do this because their beliefs were not fixed. Ever since their founding, the Dunker leader told Franklin, our principles have been improving and our errors diminishing. We fear that if we should once print our confession of faith, we should feel ourselves bound and confined by it, and perhaps be unwilling to receive farther improvement. Fascinating idea. Franklin called this modesty in a sect, his words, perhaps a singular instance in the history of mankind, every other sect supposing itself to be in possession of all truth. His admiration of the Dunkers' humility was so genuine that he implicitly recommended it to his countrymen. He knew Americans suffered from the sin of pride, as he himself did. They suffered greatly from the sin of pride. The older Franklin himself shamelessly celebrated the unmatched liberty and happiness Americans already possessed. But he believed, too, that Americans had better prospects for farther improvement than any other people on earth. They would do well to free themselves from the excesses of pride that might prevent them from continuing to grow. Franklin chose to express this very opinion in the last public speech he ever gave at the end of the Constitutional Convention. This is shortly before his encounter with Mrs. Powell, where she asked him, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? Franklin's last speech on the floor of the convention, he spoke very, very seldom. As a matter of fact, he didn't speak this time. He was laid up. He had to give a speech to another Pennsylvania delegate to read for him. His purpose was to convince 3 holdouts in the convention to sign the Constitution, to abandon their opposition. Franklin began his speech on a note of humility. I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I'm not sure I shall never approve them. In other words, it's possible that I will grow to approve them. For having lived long, I have experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions even on important subjects. The older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. It was above all Franklin's faith in America's readiness to keep growing, growing especially in citizenship, that led him to believe that they could keep the republic. After Franklin's death in 1790, some Americans took up an almost utopian vision of what the republic would accomplish. None of the founding fathers did this, and certainly Franklin didn't and never would have. He was not a dreamer. He was a man of reason, a realist, a pragmatist, but also a profound optimist. And in this, he was united with the mass of common Americans he best represented. He knew they were flawed, as he was. Yet on the whole, he believed that they had made virtuous use of their liberty. And with them, he was confident they could realize the promise of their country. And I think with that sentiment, I will close. Invite you to digest for a moment. If you have need, please feel free to have dinner. But if you have questions, please ask them.
Gene has shared all of this incredible hard work and knowledge just out of the goodness of his heart, and he's just, I think the America 250 project has awakened his amazing skill set. So again, please folks, a big round of applause for Gene Lee. And if there aren't any questions, at the risk of a bad a Liberty pun, you're now free to go.
Yeah.
Any? Yes, Nancy, ask him me.
Because I'm reading Jack Kelly's book, Arnold, and all the fighting that was going on. I was really struck by how many just local militias and ordinary citizens took up arms and they lost their life. They were able to do that, and that's truly why the revolution succeeded. And we dwell a lot on what happened in Philadelphia.
Yeah. But all over the colonies.
But the ordinary person is so motivated at that time for freedom that they just left their farms and formed militias and
Yep. Of course, not all of them. I mean, this is, of course, American historians have paid as much attention to the Revolution and the creation of the Republic as any other topic in American history. So it's been debated for many, many years how many Tories there were, how many British sympathizers there were. And there were a good number of people who left America and went to England or Canada. I think the consensus of historians now is that perhaps as many as 20% of the population sided with England, which leaves an enormous 80%. The population at this point is upwards of 2 million. A very large mass of people have been persuaded of the justice of the case for revolution and independence in resentment against British efforts to control them, to tax them without representation, but also to control their movement into the West, which would have two major consequences. One would be to, of course, provoke the Indians, and the idea was to dispossess the Indians of their land, some of the richest land on earth, and to appropriate that for themselves. Land to the West means that they are moving away from England toward the interior. They're becoming more and more likely to desire independence at that point. This looks very much to the British like exactly what it was, which is a step toward independence, a step toward rebellion. And so this is an enormous motivation lying behind the revolution, not just taxation without representation, but also the enormous desire for land, which includes dispossession of the Indians. And by the way, if you dispossess the Indians, the British have the obligation to defend their colonies 3,000 miles away. This is enormously expensive to be defending that much territory. So a complicated question, but yes, you are entirely right. The extraordinary thing is the degree to which the revolution becomes a spontaneous, popular movement. Anybody else? If you'd like to quiz me privately, you're welcome to gather around. But thank you very much for coming. It's been a you know, I have to thank Jeff and the staff of Noah Webster for giving me this opportunity to distract myself from current events. It has been an enormous pleasure to be thinking about the Founding Fathers and not you-know-who. And I mean you-know-who in both parties. I don't think either party has been particularly distinguished in recent decades.